rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
This is CNN.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asha in New York, and this is One World. Block by block, street by street, hour by hour, Ukrainian forces are fighting Russian troops for every inch of land in the eastern city of Severodonetsk, where one official says the situation is changing continuously. It is a crucial battle in Moscow's offensive to capture the entire Donbas region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky admits his troops are outnumbered and certainly outgunned. And he says the intense combat has turned Severodonetsk and neighboring Lysychansk into, quote, dead cities. The Kremlin may already be focused on its next key target. Kyiv says that Russia is intensifying artillery attacks north of Sloviansk, one of the two biggest Ukrainian-held cities in the Donetsk region. CNN's Selma Abdelaziz joins us live now from Kyiv. So let's talk about Severodonetsk, where we're seeing fierce battles street to street. What's the latest, Selma?
Right, so this is a city we've been following for days, Zain, because this is the gateway really to Luhansk. Of course, a key goal for President Putin is to take control of the Donbas region. So Severodonetsk, right there, if you look at the map, it is right on the west, a place where we're seeing fierce battles, the situation on the ground changing hour by hour. President Zelensky saying that it is an extremely difficult situation for the Ukrainian defenders on the ground, who are holding their ground for now. Last week, it looked like that city was about to fall to Russian troops. Now, Ukrainian forces saying that Russian forces are using an incredible amount of firepower, artillery, troops, resources, essentially to bomb, to try to encircle Severodonetsk, and also to attack that key access road into the city. That means that supply routes are tenuous at best for the Ukrainian defenders trying to hold their ground in that city. And it also means that for the more than 10,000 civilians trapped in Severodonetsk, for now, there is no clear way out. This is essentially a war of attrition now, Zain. They're trying to drain resources on both sides, drag this out as much as possible. It is, if you will, a kinetic and bloody stalemate. What could turn the tide here is these very key weapons, these long-range missiles that Ukraine is waiting on, the US, the UK, Germany promising to provide those, but it could be weeks before Ukrainian troops are trained on them, before they're on the ground. But they would give Ukrainian forces the ability to strike artillery positions, Russian artillery positions, up to 80 kilometers away. That could change things on the ground. But again, we could be weeks away from seeing those weapons on the ground. Zain?
And let's talk about a sort of controversial exchange between President Macron of France and President Zelensky. President Macron essentially calling for there to be some kind of off-ramp, some kind of strategic exit diplomatically for this war to end, but saying that it needs to be done in such a way that doesn't humiliate Russia. And President Zelensky was certainly not happy about that. Selma.
Yes, these rather controversial comments that President Macron made last week to French media. There was a wave of criticism. Of course, President Macron, for his part, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, says that the diplomatic world, the Western world, Ukraine's allies and the international community need to be able to bring President Putin, need to be able to bring their Russian counterparts to the table and provide them with that exit route to this conflict without humiliating Russia. President Zelensky had some very strong worded comments on that. Take a listen to what he said.
Russia has constantly derailed the ceasefire regime. Russia has derailed the exchange of prisoners. So what kind of humiliation are we talking about? I do not even believe that they are humiliating Ukraine. That would be a weak position. No one is humiliating us. They are killing us. So in response, we are not going to humiliate anyone. We are going to respond in kind.
Now, why does this matter, Zain? Right now, all diplomatic efforts have essentially stalled. Again, we're looking at what is not essentially a stalemate on the ground, but a kinetic, bloody stalemate. Both sides here, we've heard from Western intelligence saying that Russian forces are losing thousands of troops on the ground, of course, losing key weaponry, precision weaponry, but also on the Ukrainian side, major losses as well. So as the Western world, as allies for Ukraine, try to find a diplomatic solution, there's a very key positioning here that President Zelensky wants to see. He wants to have the upper hand. He wants to make clear that this country will not concede to President Putin. Zain.
All right, Salma, live for us there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, for weeks, we've been talking about the unfolding humanitarian disaster in the Russian-occupied city of Mariupol in southern Ukraine. But now we're learning new details that almost defy comprehension. An advisor to the mayor there says the city is quietly being closed amid fears of a cholera outbreak. He says there are so many corpses, so many bodies piling up, the Russians don't really know what to do with them. Mariupol was relentlessly bombed and besieged for months. Ukraine says that during that time, more than 20,000 civilians were killed. More than 600 kilometers away in Kyiv, workers at the central morgue are trying to identify the remains of some of the soldiers who were killed in Mariupol. CNN's Ben Wiedemann witnessed part of this gruesome and grueling process, but a warning that some viewers may indeed find these images disturbing.
And so begins on a sunny summer morning the grimmest of tasks. Workers at Kyiv's central morgue examine the contents of 160 dirty, putrid body bags, containing the badly decomposed remains of soldiers killed during the 2-month siege of the port city of Mariupol and in the city's sprawling Azovstal steel plant, where Ukrainian forces made their last stand. Ukraine and Russia have conducted an exchange of bodies as part of the agreement that ended the siege. Forensic examiner Lilia Filipchuk has been on the job for 3 years. Since the war began, she's had little rest. We also examined the bodies from Bucha and Irpin, she says, referring to Kyiv suburbs where retreating Russian forces are accused of committing atrocities against civilians. Elena Tolkachova is also helping. She's affiliated with the Azov Brigade, which fought in Mariupol. The brigade is a nationalist militia that was integrated into Ukraine's armed forces. The morgue is already full of bodies from Kyiv, from Bucha, from Irpin, she says. So we have to put them in a refrigerator truck. Morgue workers search the ripped and ragged clothing for documents and tag and bag personal items. This is just the start of a long process. Some of these bodies have no identification, so their DNA will have to be sampled. And it may take a month, maybe more, to find out who they were. And only then will their loved ones know their fate. Finality for the living and the dead will have to wait. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Kyiv.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's ready to focus on what he calls the people's priorities. This after narrowly surviving a confidence vote on Monday. In his cabinet meeting earlier today, reports say Mr. Johnson told ministers it's time to draw a line under the Partygate scandal. Of course, it was those parties during lockdown, among other things, that prompted the confidence vote. So can Mr. Johnson move on? Let's go live now to 10 Downing Street, where we find our Phil Black. So he sort of narrowly survived this confidence vote, but he is incredibly weakened going forward, Phil.
Yeah, he survived. Comfortably, he would say, and his supporters say that as well. Decisively, they say. He wasn't toppled, but he was certainly wounded, and weakness was revealed. That said, the Prime Minister's view is that this has now been dealt with. A win is the way his supporters like to put it, that a line has been drawn. The government now, and he now they have a mandate collectively to get on with important policies that are important to the British people. The Prime Minister and some of his supporters have also tried to characterise this whole affair as something that really only the media and the opposition Labour Party particularly care about. That is, I think, to put it kindly, not very accurate, really, because clearly 41% of his own sitting Conservative members felt strongly enough to vote for his ouster. And on top of that, it's not hard to find British people who feel pretty strongly that integrity should be part of leadership, that how the Prime Minister behaved during the darkest days of the pandemic, well, that really matters. Take a listen now to a snapshot of views from some of the British public.
For my generation, it's kind of like it just feels completely out of touch with. They're all kind of like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're all in a completely different class than I am. And it kind of just feels like every policy they bring in is just self-serving and doesn't really feel like it reflects the entire public.
I think they've started the process, which needs some time for reflection, since the general position seems to be who follows. But I don't think that is a good enough reason not to get rid of somebody who appears to be unfit for the office and, frankly, is a stranger to the truth.
Perhaps it's a case that they don't know that there's a good leader there ready to take over. If you had a great contender, then perhaps people would stand behind a no-confidence vote.
In some ways, I feel sorry for him because, you know, the country's never gone through a pandemic or left the EU before. But the party thing, everyone's been fined and he was just drinking wine. So, yeah, it's pretty poor. People couldn't see their families and stuff, so I feel real bad for the people that lost people.
It's interesting that two of those voices there, Zane, suggest that perhaps Johnson was saved by the fact that there is no obvious alternative. But that also speaks to the strength of feeling among the 41% of MPs, Conservative MPs, who did vote to try and push him out because they were prepared to accept the consequences of that, which would mean a lengthy leadership competition, one with an uncertain outcome, one that would perhaps deliver a leader that would not be as electorally successful as Boris Johnson. Despite all of that uncertainty, they were still prepared, either through principle or through political self-preservation. They were pretty determined to try and oust the Prime Minister. As it stands, however, that attempt failed, and so under the rules, as they stand, he is safe from a similar challenge for at least a year. But as we've heard today, the rules of the Conservative Party can change. Zane.
All right, Phil Blacklight for us there. Thank you so much. Right, I want to turn now to the US, where a small group of lawmakers from both major parties is negotiating legislation aimed at curbing the nation's gun violence. But already, Republicans are signaling that raising the age requirement to 21 for purchasing semi-automatic firearms is unlikely to pass. Other topics on the table: expanding background checks, incentivizing states to pass red flag laws to deny firearms to people with mental health issues, and investing in more mental health services, and also upgrading school security. Lauren Fox joins us live now from Capitol Hill. So, Lauren, just how much will Democrats have to compromise here to get the 60 votes they need?
Well, whether or not this negotiation is successful is really going to hinge on just how small Democrats are willing to go with their wish list. For decades, Democrats have been trying to fight to bring back the assault weapons ban, to try to limit the size of high-capacity magazines. They are not going to get anywhere near that in this negotiation. And the lead Democratic negotiator, Chris Murphy, a Democrat from Connecticut, he's cognizant and aware that those are the dynamics going into this. If they are going to pass anything, Republicans are talking about a very narrow set of provisions, one of which is potentially including juvenile records in a background check that you give someone who's 18 to 21 years old who goes into a gun store and wants to buy a semi-automatic weapon like an AR-15, one of those weapons that we saw used at that Uvalde shooting at that elementary school. So that is the kind of thing that they are talking about. But again, it's very narrow. It also includes school safety, more money for mental health records. All of those items are things that they are looking at, Zane, but that is a far cry from what President Joe Biden argued for last week in his primetime address, saying he wanted to bring back the assault weapons ban. That's simply not going to happen. Less guns is not really the goal of this negotiation. Instead, it's just finding something very narrow that Democrats and Republicans can agree to. Because remember, in the Senate, they need 10 Republican votes at least. And many Republicans I'm talking to, Zane, are saying that they need more than just 10 because the other Republicans are going to need cover. So they're hoping to get at least about half of their conference. That's a very heavy lift for anything substantial. Zane?
Yeah, you can say that again. Lauren Fox, live for us there. Thank you so much. India's ruling party has punished officials for making derogatory comments about Islam's prophet Muhammad. The comments brought scorn from majority Muslim nations at a time India is trying to improve relations with them. Vedika Suk explains.
Over a dozen Islamic nations have expressed outrage over controversial comments made by two representatives from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Hindu Nationalist Party, the Bharatiya Janata Party, against Prophet Muhammad. Iran, Qatar and Kuwait even summoned India's diplomatic representatives to protest against the comments made by the party officials. A statement from Qatar's Foreign Office says it wants the Indian government to immediately condemn the remarks and publicly apologize to the Muslim world. Oman's Grand Mufti described the comments as a war against every Muslim, and Iran called the incident unacceptable. As a mark of protest, supermarkets in Kuwait removed Indian goods from racks. Following the outrage, the party suspended a spokeswoman Sunday and expelled another party member. Statements issued by the Indian government said tweets denigrating a religious personality were made by certain fringe elements and did not reflect the views of the Indian government. The Indian government is now in damage control mode with Arab countries. According to analysts, Prime Minister Modi has tried very hard to keep his party's domestic political agenda from impacting ties with Muslim nations. This controversy comes at a time when Gulf states and India are looking to enhance their economic partnership. Also, millions of Indians work in the region, sending home billions of dollars in remittances. Importantly, India is the world's third biggest importer of oil. It looks to the Middle East for 65% of its crude imports. According to analysts, India has been witnessing deep religious polarization under Modi's leadership. A recent annual report by the US State Department on international religious freedom alleged attacks on members of the minority communities in India through all of last year. The Indian government was quick to reject the report findings. About 14% of India's population is Muslim. Vedika Sood, CNN, New Delhi.
Well, still to come here on One World, two of South Africa's most wanted men are detained in Dubai. Details on the possible extradition of the Gupta brothers and the charges they face. That's next.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
Try to be global and we try to be smart. And we try very hard to get both of those every week. But I want to hear our authentic voices of people who are passionate or intelligent about a subject, who will make you smarter, move you emotionally, who will kind of challenge your mind or move your heart. And that's the consistency that we try to get at.
Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sundays on CNN.
I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? Or would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
Police in the UAE have arrested two of South Africa's most wanted fugitives. Businessman Atul Gupta and his brother Rajesh. Both men could soon be extradited back to South Africa. where they face multiple charges. They've been accused of political corruption under the presidency of Jacob Zuma. The former leader and the brothers have all denied any wrongdoing. We've got our Eleni Giokos covering the story from Dubai. So Eleni, obviously you lived in South Africa for a very long time. You were born and raised there. When you think about some of the economic problems plaguing South Africa, you think of corruption, you think of state capture. For people who don't know much about the Gupta brothers, just walk us through what they're accused of and also how they allegedly manipulated government officials in order to enrich themselves.
You know, if I had to say Gupta brothers to any South African, it's synonymous with corruption, money laundering, fraud, and state capture. And it was really a period of madness when Jacob Zuma was president in South Africa over 9 years, Zain. And it was basically brazen. It was sort of in your face corruption and capture. The public protector at the time had put through a very thorough investigation that spanned over 3 to 4 years and called it the State Capture Report. And it detailed so much of what people had been suspecting, so much of what journalists had been covering. And it showed the influence of the Gupta brothers on Jacob Zuma and his government throughout various departments, whether it was healthcare, whether it was defense, state-owned enterprises, the power utility, the South African Airways management as well. It really just stemmed, there's such a long list. I mean, it's really difficult to go through all of it. But it really came to a head when there was one specific project, and this is what this specific case pertains to, and this is what they are being accused of for money laundering and fraud, the Estina Dairy project. It was not a lot of money. It was around $2 million, but it was meant to uplift poor black South Africans in a rural area. And it really outraged the country because this is what they did. They stole money from the poorest of the poor in the most unequal country in the world. And remember, this is according to the State Capture Report, Commission of Inquiry, evidence from a lot of witnesses, but they themselves are denying allegations, as you say. They never appeared in front of the state inquiry either, and yet neither did Jacob Zuma. And of course, they have to face charges, right? They have to go to court, which of course they left the country when Jacob Zuma resigned in 2018. They came here to Dubai. And for average South Africans, they felt that they're dealing with the aftermath of this corruption, that people are trying to quantify just how much they stole, which runs into the hundreds and millions of dollars. But also importantly, some analysts say that left many people poor and poverty-stricken. And then the Gupta brothers were able to find refuge in Dubai without dealing with the law. A red notice was given through Interpol. The UAE government arrested them on the 2nd of June. Now the question is, are they going to be extradited?
All right, Eleni Giokos, that is the big question. Eleni Giokos, live for us there. As you point out, there has been so much public outrage around the Gupta brothers, but their arrest certainly does send the message that, listen, there isn't going to be one rule for the rich and the privileged and one rule for anyone else anymore. But Eleni, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Zain.
All right, at a meeting at the UN Security Council Monday, the European Council President slammed Russia for blocking Ukraine grain exports. Charles Michel accused Russia of fueling the food crisis and addressed his criticism to its UN ambassador directly, prompting him to storm out of the meeting. I want you to watch this.
Mr. Ambassador of the Russian Federation, let's be honest. The Kremlin is using food supplies as a stealth missile against developing countries. The dramatic consequences of Russia's war are spilling over across the globe, and this is driving up food prices, pushing people into poverty and destabilizing entire regions.
For its part, Russia says that 2 Ukrainian ports are ready to begin grain exports. Russia says it had to clear Ukrainian mines before letting ships use the waters. In addition, the military will search incoming vessels to make sure they're not importing weapons. Jemana Karache takes a closer look at the grain crisis and ongoing efforts to end it.
From his Istanbul terrace, Yuruk Ishuk has watched part of Russia's invasion of Ukraine play out in Turkey's Bosphorus Strait. First, it was the military buildup. Now the ship watcher and founder of the Bosphorus Observer has been documenting Russia's theft of Ukrainian grain. With the help of satellite images and Ukrainian activists, he tracked and filmed this Russian ship transiting the Bosphorus. The ship appeared in Maxar Technologies images obtained by CNN last month. It was smuggling stolen Ukrainian wheat.
This is a bottleneck spot, and there aren't so many spots like this. This easy to monitor. We almost miss nothing coming out of Black Sea from here. Only in last 2-3 weeks, we witnessed at least 10 journeys of 10 different ships carried wheat from occupied Ukrainian ports into mostly to Syria. Because people are worried about the sanctions, etc., they are usually carrying first to Syria, and it's getting distributed to the other Middle Eastern customers from Syria so far.
Turkey's straits are governed by the 1936 Montreux Convention. It's already restricted access to Russian naval vessels under that agreement, but when it comes to commercial traffic, it's limited in what it can do. But Russia is not only accused of theft. Ukraine, the US, and the EU have all accused it of holding the world to ransom, blockading Ukrainian ports and stopping the export of more than 20 million tons of Ukrainian grain that dozens of countries rely on. Russia blames Ukraine for the blockade and says it's Western sanctions that are causing a global food crisis.
Turkey's trying to use its strategic location and its close ties with both its Black Sea neighbors, Russia and Ukraine, to try and broker a deal that would establish a sea corridor for Ukrainian grain exports.
That potential grain corridor through the Turkish Straits will top the agenda when the Russian foreign minister meets his Turkish counterpart on Wednesday, a meeting Turkish officials are hoping will lay the groundwork for talks soon between Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations.
Turkey can definitely provide service as an auditor to make sure that grain is being sent out from both Ukraine and Russia. Being one of the Black Sea powers, it has the capacity to provide security inside the Black Sea as well. So it can be a player that provides security, that provides observation, provides auditing that could be acceptable and considered legitimate by both Kiev and Moscow.
But the Russians will have their own demands, likely unacceptable to Western powers. They've already indicated they want sanctions lifted.
I expect the Russians to want a waiver on their grain sales as well, and they feel that they have the leverage right now. Turkey is going to be very important in being able to negotiate between Russia and the West to be able to get a sanctions waiver for the Russians for their grain sales as well.
When few will trust what Russia promises, there's no easy path out of this. But Turkey's hoping it can at least begin the complex process of trying to end the blockade and avert a crisis the UN has warned will lead to famine and instability around the world. Jumana Karache, CNN, Istanbul.
All right, still to come here on One World, changes are coming to international figure skating. We'll tell you about the new age limits and the doping scandal that inspired them.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
Opay is Nigeria's foremost financial inclusion service provider. Everywhere in Nigeria today, even in the remotest part of Nigeria, we have a large agency banking business with more than 500,000 agents across Nigeria. But we're also the last mile in terms of access to financial services for more than 10 million Nigerians, many of which do not have any form of bank account through the Opay digital wallet. We go to where banks cannot go to. We are much more nimble. We are more tech-oriented. Therefore, we can deploy in a more agile way and get to reach far many more areas. That is where you find Opay. The excluded in Nigeria will be truly brought into the formal financial services, and that's our mission.
Connecting Africa in association with Afreximbank.
CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. Russia has imposed sanctions on 61 Americans, including U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and leading defense and media executives as well. The Foreign Ministry says it's banning them from the country in response to U.S. sanctions against Russia. Dozens of people have gathered in Houston, Texas to demand Russia release pro basketball player Brittany Griner. She's been jailed in Russia for more than 3 months for allegedly carrying oil made from cannabis. Griner's trial is set for later this month. She faces up to 10 years in prison. The controversial Saudi-backed golf tournament LIV Golf begins on Thursday. Golf legend Phil Mickelson will compete just months after controversial comments about the Saudi Arabian-funded events. The PGA Tour is considering punishing golfers who play in the tournament. That's okay with golfer Dustin Johnson. He's just quit the PGA to do just that. Right here on One World, as we relay what's happening around the world, it's part of our mission to ensure that Africa has an equal seat at the table alongside Europe, the Americas and Asia. On a news level, yes, we will of course absolutely tell you when war, for example, erupts in Ethiopia or when terrorists attack in Nigeria. We'll report on the threat of famine, for example, in Madagascar, and we'll keep on showing you how the climate crisis is demolishing entire communities. But we're keen for you, our viewers, to understand that while these stories may fit certain widely accepted stereotypes about the continent, to remember that the nations that form Africa are as diverse and as rich and as significant as any other place on Earth. Time now for the exchange in my conversation with one writer who is pushing back on African stereotypes. Deepa Falayan's debut book, Africa is Not a Country, is being called a funny and insightful take on modern Africa, which tells a more comprehensive story about the continent. I started by asking Deepa his thoughts on why African stereotypes persist.
The challenges many African countries have is that most people don't interact with them in any real way. They don't think of them as individual entities with their own specific cultures. And what we've seen is that people in the past have taken advantage of that. African countries have fought for years to try and improve things like tourism in their own regions, but what people see are the images that continue to populate our popular culture. If you ask most people to close their eyes and think of Africa, 2 types of images will appear. They'll think of poverty and devastation, or they will imagine safari. With very little, if nothing at all, in between. And so the aim of my book is to try and fill in those gaps and try and get people to engage with the region in a real way so that countries can present themselves and their cultures in the way that is beneficial to them.
So as somebody in the media yourself, how do you juggle reporting the truth of what's happening in Africa? So let's say the security crisis happening in Nigeria, or if it was last year, for example, we did a lot, for example, on the war in Ethiopia. How do you juggle that without feeding into harmful stereotypes?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is important is to remember that Africa is anything and everything. There are absolutely stories of struggle and strife and pain like there are with any region in the world. But what's important is that you balance that with a fuller picture. In my reporting, I make sure that I try and include context in the equation. I think a lot of the times when people report on Africa, they think entirely about, this is just typical Africa. There they go again, struggling, rather than introducing some context, some history into the conversation. Many of the issues we see today hark back to colonialism and the founding of many of these nations, which a lot of people don't realize, that many African countries were essentially built to fail by colonialists. And so when you introduce that aspect of the story into conversations about countries, then you paint a more accurate picture. So it's important never to ignore the challenges that are faced by African countries, but also to firstly tell a fuller context-filled story, but as well as to celebrate the successes as well. With that success, a lot of the time, people will realize that, many African countries are really, in a tiny space of time, are doing relatively well.
One thing that has become abundantly clear to me is that, the Western way of life really would not be possible without Africa. When you think about the exports and the raw materials. I mean, if you drink coffee, if you drink tea, if you have a cell phone, if you play video games, if you ride a bicycle, if you drive a car, if you wear a wedding ring. So much of the things that we take for granted in the Western world has been powered essentially by Africa. And by the way, to be frank, on the backs of Africans. But yeah, Africa, you know, it's everywhere in our lives, but simultaneously nowhere. You know, we don't really think about how much we owe Africa here in the West. Why not? Why is Africa so not present in our daily lives, given how much it powers the West?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And that's fundamental to this book and the frustrations that so many people across the continent feel when their country is spoken of as if it's part of just one monolith with predetermined destinies. You know, people have never built personal relationships with Africa. You know, they only consider it as a place where you send aid to. So it's easy to overlook the achievements of countries throughout the region, the contributions they've had to the Western world, because you're not even looking for the success stories. You're not looking for where you can see positivity in Africa. You know, you only think about Africa when it's time to pity people, and that's a real shame. You know, in the book, I talk about the contributions that African countries, especially West Africa, made to building the culture of Southern America. You know, at one point, Southern America was built off of the rice trade, and a lot of that work was done by African slaves who were brought over. And so I think it's really important to remember that, you know, when we talk about the history of Africa and African countries, we're also talking about the history of the West, including sort of modern culture and popular culture. And, you know, that's why it's so important to really shift the narrative around this region.
Yeah, the continents are so intertwined. You know, and as much as we talk about, you know, the raw materials, and as much as we talk about, as you point out, the other stereotype about Africa, really the safaris and the savannas, the fact is the most valuable resource that our continent has to offer the world is its people. What do you want the world to know about the value? And obviously, you know, I say African people, but obviously I'm talking about 1.2 billion people, and it's impossible to generalize because there are so many different countries. But what do you want the world to know about what Africa's people have to offer?
They can offer anything and everything. And I think that's the key to shifting the narrative about the region. You know, there's not just one thing. It's not to say that, you know, African people can offer, you know, achievements in music, or just in art, or in politics, or in food, in cuisine. You know, it can be anything and it can be everything. Value comes with appreciating people's complexity, appreciating that they're individuals with individual stories and individual culture. And I think that when people realize that, they'll see that this region is so full with just wonderful stories and people who have worked incredibly hard to build the identity of their countries in such a short period of time. You know, my family are Nigerian, and Nigeria is a country that is younger than my parents. And in such a short period of time between 1960 and now, you know, Nigeria has made huge developments in so many different areas and had such influence around the world.
Dipo, thank you so much for being with us.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
The International Skating Union has voted to gradually raise the minimum age for senior competitions from 15 to 17 years old. It comes after the Russian figure skater Kamila Valieva was involved in a doping scandal at the young age of just 15. Her case sparked calls for reform to protect the physical and mental health of minors. CNN's Patrick Snell joins us live now with more. So the scandal involving this 15-year-old Kamila Valieva was a real wake-up call for the entire sport, Patrick.
Yeah, Zain, hi there. Thanks for having me on. No question. And today's development really significant. Let's just recap, though, because this was a huge story earlier in the year, and I'm glad it remains front and center right now. It all goes back to the Beijing Winter Games in China in February. A huge story, massive story. It all centered on the then 15-year-old. Valieva since turned 16 just this past April, in fact. The teen at the center of a global doping scandal. Remember, the eyes of the whole world on her, watching and waiting. It sparked international outrage and calls for review of the sport's duty of care. So to get to today's key development, which comes in on this Tuesday, and the news of the International Skating Union now voting to change the rules, raising the minimum age limit for competitions from 15 to 17, as you said off the top. It's going to be done gradually in a move described as really historic, very historic decision by the ISU president, the sports governing body, passing the proposal by a 2/3 majority. Going to be brought in gradually. That's important to re-emphasize, so that by the time we get to the next Winter Olympics in Italy, the age will be 17. The result at the ISU Congress in Thailand, there were sparking cheers and the emotion there around the room. I want to get to a statement now from the global governing body, which reads, the ISU Congress voted in favor of gradually increasing the age limit from 15 to 17 years for the sake of protecting the physical and mental health and emotional well-being of skaters. There will be no change for the season 22-23, an increase to 16 for 23-24, and an increase to 17 for 24-25 and subsequent seasons. For further context, just kind of to retrace the timeline, Zane, on all of this, the Russian teen testing positive. It was a positive test for a banned heart medication, which can help endurance. Even though that test was taken the previous December of 21, it was only analysed and reported to Russia's anti-doping agency the following February. It resulted in Valieva's provisional suspension, and that's significant because it came a day after she'd helped propel her team to a gold medal finish in the figure skating team event. But the skater was then reinstated after an appeal. The Court of Arbitration for Sport, that's CAS, allowed her to compete. Yes, allowed her to compete in the Olympics. She went on to compete in the individual figure skating event, and we will never, ever forget those images. At least I won't. She fell multiple times. She was distraught, wasn't she? Left on the ice in tears, finishing in 4th place. By the way, the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, has said it's going to be investigating Valieva's entourage. Really significant, that, Zane, because the adults around her responsible for her skating and her overall welfare. Focus on them now.
Right, because she's just a child. She's just a teenager. Those images I will never forget either. Patrick, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much, and thank you for watching One World. I'm Zain Asher. African Voices up next. You're watching CNN.
Egypt is transitioning towards a sustainable, circular economy. Through the opening of the Gabal Al Asfar wastewater treatment plant, it is using treated water to irrigate agricultural land and is producing organic fertilizers. The plant has been designed to reduce waste and optimizes the use of water resources. It generates electricity and saves carbon emissions, ensuring that over 8 million people across the country live better, healthier lives.
African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. Hear their stories next. In association with Glow.
Coronavirus. To get daily news updates in your inbox, sign up for the CNN newsletter. Coronavirus. Fact versus fiction.
We share this place, we all belong. We have to restore this planet's soul. Teach it something more than what we know. Give it water, give it sun, room to grow. I can see a better tomorrow. I can see a better tomorrow.
He's interviewed 5 U.S. presidents, authored 7 books, and has an independent voice that resonates.
What happened to when we were united against a common enemy?
He's raw, unique, and one of America's most important talk show hosts. Watch Smirconish, Saturday on CNN.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
African Voices Changemakers, in association with Glow Unlimited.
Welcome to African Voices. I'm Mari Chopo. This week, we're taking a journey upward with a hot air balloon pilot who's proving the sky is the limit.
Greatest lesson of ballooning is the art of acceptance. I am an overthinker by nature, but ballooning has taught me to let go. And when you let go, it's phenomenal how things turn to fall into place.
I use aviation to inspire youth to follow their passions.
My name is Makaleng Matebula. I'm South Africa's first black female hot air balloon pilot, and I am a change maker.
Sema Kaleng Matebula says there's a lot more to piloting a hot air balloon than majestic views and floating in the clouds.
It is a lot of hard work. It's not just flying a plane and taking cool selfies with the pilot uniform. It is discipline, it is honor, it is respect, it is responsibility, and it is accountability. And you go up with gas and a flame and fingers crossed.
We got to spend a weekend with Sema, learning the ups and downs of hot air ballooning.
So a day in my life entails 2 a.m. morning weather checks. We get to the balloon field, freezing cold, but the excitement of the free flight keeps you going. We set up the balloon and then we get to float in the clouds for an hour or so, and then we touch down and we're back to Joburg and our everyday lives while everyone is stuck in traffic.
A lot of work is required to prep the balloon, which Sema says inflates to the size of a 12-story building.
And if you can hear anything or smell anything, you have a gas leak, which is the last thing you want when you're going to play with an open flame. Two, three, four, and there we go. So cold inflation gives it its form, hot inflation lets it oscillate for flight. It gets really big very quickly. If you blink, you'll miss it. Just standing here gives you a magnitude of the balloon. So balloons make for terrible conversation areas because mid-chat you just have to burn.
A flawless takeoff and calm conditions made for a perfect flight today. But Sema says it doesn't always go according to plan.
My greatest struggle is the weather. So Mother Nature is very graceful with us, but she can also be our worst nightmare. And ballooning requires very calm and stable winds, and when the wind isn't on your side, unfortunately we can't have as much fun as we would like to. So we've got altitude, rate of ascent and descent, we're at 0, so we're maintaining a steady height.
She says the balloon gets its direction from different wind channels, a metaphor for her own path.
The winds have swept me into journeys and areas and careers that were out of reach for someone like me. And that's why I do this, because I'm giving every other young girl a point of reference.
The hot air balloon industry has long been a predominantly white, male-dominated space. Sema wants to be part of the change.
So BAFS is the Balloon and Airship Federation of South Africa. They partnered with the Department of Sport and Recreation, and they came up with all the funding that led to me attaining my pilot license. And we've got 2 other trainees, and we hope that they'll be shaking out soon. But I'm the only girl, so we're having a lot of fun adding pink to the sport. Lots of physically intensive labor, especially on pack-up, but it makes it all worth it.
While she pilots solo, a flight takes teamwork on the ground.
Ballooning, you develop quite a close bond. It almost develops a sense of family. And Flip was just like a dad to me, always looking out for me, always making sure that I'm running, I'm exploring, I'm making enough mistakes, because that's probably the only way you're going to learn.
It was nice training Sema. It's because she grasped this pretty quickly and she could then deal with the situations in hand.
Flying is not Sema's only job. She also works full-time on the ground.
So we are at Makoya Lodge, just north of Hartebeespoort Dam, and it's one of my favorite places to work because it gives me the flexibility to just land and get enough time to work on the corporate job.
And somehow, she still has energy to go for a hike with friends in the evening.
So my friends keep me grounded and reminding me that why am I doing this? You know, they see beyond the Simmer the balloon pilot. They remind me of who I am, what are my values.
Next, Sema takes us back to her hometown.
20,000 naira for free. 20,000 naira bonus. Is your line blocked? Then move to Glow.
I'm reconnected.
Because we've all reconnected. And it's simple. Dial *109# and link your NIN to your new or existing Glow number. Get up to 20,000 naira for free with Glow.
20,000 naira bonus free.
Yes, so free.
Nigel, what are you waiting for?
African Voices Changemakers. Create opportunities. Impact communities. Transform lives. Hear more of their stories tomorrow. In association with Glow.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 80,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
Sema Kaleng Matibula is a self-proclaimed aeronaut explorer and one of only 5 female hot air balloon pilots in all of South Africa.
What I love most about my job is it doesn't feel like a job. It's not a job. It's an extension of who I am.
Sema says she fell into her high-flying career by chance.
So I hold a joint honors in politics and international relations from WITS, but finding a job in the industry proved to be very difficult. I consulted professional help and they introduced me to the ballooning and aviation industry. So 2018, I started as a marketing assistant. It was actually the 2018 Hot Air Balloon Championships the week before I started working for the ballooning industry. I saw my first hot air balloon at that champs, fell completely in love, went from marketing office to balloon field to kitchen to everywhere the industry could take me. And then in 2019, the Balloon and Airship Federation of South Africa, BAFSA, and the Department of Sport and Recreation put together a grant to train young, upcoming youth and black youth in the sport to kind of facilitate this form of access and interest in the sport. I wanted to be part of this industry and make my mark. And that's when I realized that it goes beyond just the office and the field. I can actually be a pilot. There was no black pilot to reference to, but I knew that there was space for me, and I created that space.
That sense of tenacity is something Sema says she has had from childhood.
My childhood was a mix of excitement, adventure, and a lot of nerves from my mother. I don't think she expected her last born to be the chaotic one.